There we go. All right, well, thanks for joining us tonight, everyone. For those of you who are new with Zoom, you can move the pictures of people around, and you can even minimize it so that you don't have to see anyone else's face except for the speaker, if you want to. And then also, if you hover around the bottom of your screen, you should be able to open a chat box, and that's where you can type in your questions for us tonight. So we have a series of speakers tonight, and as you have questions, you can just type them in the chat box, and we'll do the Q&A at the end, and we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So I'll just start by introducing myself. I'm Jennifer Cook, Gilpin County, Colorado State University Extension Director. And this webinar is also made possible by partnerships with Slaws and Slaws, Timberline Fire, and the Boulder Watershed Collective. So tonight we have Daniel Geckner from the Boulder Watershed Collective and also working with Slaws and Slaws. And he'll be presenting on some defensible space and like a checklist of things that you can do around your home for wildfire preparation. And then we have David Femmer from Timberline Fire, and he'll just be talking about general kind of emergency preparedness and what to expect from a firefighter perspective. And just so you all know, David is on call tonight, so hopefully he will not get a call, but if he does, we'll have to switch up our presentation a little bit. So also, Nate, if you want to go ahead and start recording this. So this will be recorded and we'll post it on the Slaws and Slaws website, and that website we have on the last slide, so you can write it down if you're interested. All right, so without further ado, I'll just jump right in. So I'm going to talk about wildfire forecasts. And of course, we can't exactly say yes or no or where or when, but there are some factors that we can think about to understand more about forecasting fire in the future. So drought is certainly one that we can think about. We know that drought causes everything to dry up and potentially causes more wildfires to happen. So this is from the Colorado Drought Monitor, this map, and you can see here we are, the peak to peak region. We're right now considered in moderate drought. So even though we've had a pretty wet past few weeks in the mountains here, we're still in a moderate drought, and some areas higher in the mountains are even in more severe drought. So drought certainly plays a role, and we have to remember that we're still dry. So also fire suppression, as you all probably heard this one, we've, just generally suppressed fire over the years as we're building more in the mountains, more in the wildland urban interface. So we're trying to suppress more fires in order to save homes. So that's certainly increasing the risk because fires have been suppressed more and more. And then the last two are fuel, the amount of fuel or vegetation that are on our landscape, and then warming trends or what we're projecting in the future. So I'm going to talk about those last two in the next few slides here. So fire behavior, fire is different on different types of landscapes. And so I thought I'd just pull up this so you can sort of just see where you are based on either if you know what trees you're living around or if you know what elevation you live at. So for example, you can see on the right-hand side around 9,000 feet is a lodgepole pine forest. So there's aspens and lodgepole are the common trees, and that's around where I live, where the Gilpin County Extension office is, and there's other trees, of course, intermixed, but these are the predominant trees. And then I expect some of you are in the ponderosa, Doug fir, mixed conifer forest areas. And the reason why I show this is we're going to talk a little bit about how these forests respond to fire a little differently. And also I want you to understand that fire is just a normal part of these ecosystems, and it's crucial for things like nutrient cycling, for clearing away dead or diseased trees, and then for providing opportunity for new growth. Oh, and I also wanted to thank the Southern Rockies Fire Science webinar series. I took much of this information and some of these slides from their presentations this year on the 2020 Colorado fire season. So anyway, so these are the forest types that we saw on the last slide. And it's just on a different scale here. So on vertically is elevation, and then horizontally it's showing fire frequency and fire severity. So we'll start at the bottom here. So in the lower elevations, like a pinyon pine pinyon juniper forest, there's not much vegetation. So there's not much fire in general. But then as we move up into these different forest types to like the ponderosa pine forests, you can see that's where this line moves out so that the fire frequency becomes higher and it and a little bit more the fire frequency is higher but not as severe. And so the ponderosa pine dry mixed conifer area is kind of considered like a Goldilocks zone where there's just the right amount of vegetation, and it dries out very quickly. So in these areas, the fire is generally a low to moderate severity, but it happens more frequently. So in these areas, the ponderosa pine mixed conifer, every 7 to 50 years is a general time frame for the fire return interval. But then as we move up this scale to higher elevations, it's a little wetter, a little bit cooler into our lodgepole pine, aspen areas. So here, like around 8,000 to 10,000 feet, the fire return interval is 75 to 300 years. So it's quite a bit longer of a time in between fires. However, the fires are much more intense. They tend to be stand replacing fires, really severe fires. And this is because all these trees are generally growing much denser. Like if you think of our traditional typical lodgepole pine forest, everything is very dense. So fire can spread really easily from crown to crown. So now you can kind of understand and know what to expect based on where you live and the forest type, when you might expect, how often you might expect to see a fire. So this next slide, we're talking about the general warming climate change in Colorado. And so there's two scenarios of Colorado climate projections that I'm showing here, and they're both showing warming through 2070 by, depending on plus or minus 2 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And so generally the projections are saying that it'll be warmer in the summer, but the precipitation is less specific. The models don't really agree, but in general, they expect that there'll be more precipitation in the mountains in the winter, but then drying in the summer. And as we learned from the last slide, with more precipitation, we'll have more vegetation, but then with the drying summers, it'll dry out. And so that might create more of an opportunity for fire. And then finally, this last slide that I'll talk about for forecasting is just projecting in the future with 1 degree Celsius warming, that there'll be more intense, more areas burned across the West, unfortunately. They're just generally predicting hotter, drier, and windier conditions, which, as we know, will set the stage for larger, more intense fires. So obviously we don't have control over the climate and the weather and the wind, but what we do have control over is how we want to manage our landscapes and our households. And so that's what David is going to talk about next. As you can see, fire mitigation is really important. It's going to become more important in years to come. So David, go ahead and take it away.
All right. So thank you, Jennifer, for kind of the intro on where a lot of this is coming from, and kind of the next part here is especially us as the fire department and the Fire Protection District in the area how we look at this in terms of our response and what homeowners and people in the area can do to help us with that. So Jennifer's got the slide control there, so we'll go to the next one.
Sorry, my slide's not advancing here.
Oh, no worries. So Timberline Fire Protection District, we cover all of Gilpin County except for the cities of Black Hawk and Central City, and then also a small part of Boulder County on the north end of things. We're a combination department. We have 3 paid shift lieutenants, a handful of paid chiefs, but then the rest of us are volunteers running the day-to-day show at the fire department. Covering such a large area, we do have 9 stations, all the way from up on Magnolia down to on Apex Road outside of Black Hawk, with about 65 members, both paid and volunteer combined at the moment. And we run an average of about 750 calls a year. So just a little bit about kind of what we have, and there's a couple of pictures that should pop up on this one. We have 4 what are called Type 1 engines. These are going to be your bigger, kind of what you expect, a little bit more of what you expect when you see a fire department fire engine rolling down the road. We also have a couple of tenders to increase our water carrying ability. They carry 2,000 gallons of water, since we don't have, with a very small exception around the sheriff's complex and the rec center, any sort of municipal water system to work with. We have to be able to bring our own water with us. And then we have 5 what are called brush trucks or Type 6 engines. They're smaller, more maneuverable, so we can get into some of those more hard to reach Forest Service areas, tighter access areas, that sort of thing. Downside is they carry less water. So we have to be a little bit more resilient with what we're able to supply them with. One of the big benefits we have up here is we actually have a state wildland fire module based in Gilpin County over by, again, that sheriff's complex and rec center area. They're an all hazards group, but with a focus primarily on wildland response. They also have an engine there, as well as a couple other smaller vehicles to help transport 8 personnel total to be able to help us in response. Again, primarily wildland fires, but you'll see them helping us out on just about anything. We're super fortunate here in Gilpin County to have them right here, basically embedded with us. So a little bit, okay, what type of fires do we fight? Answer is really all kinds, but going back to what we were, this is conversation, looking at the wildland side of things, well, slides got a little out of order there, but couple of different types of fires: ground fires, surface fires, and crown fires. A ground fire is going to be something where it's kind of punking around in either the surface litter or something like that, that kind of accumulated mass of dead material that's on the ground. These tend to be slow moving, they tend to linger, and this will be the thing where you'll not know it's there until you see a little bit of smoke puffing up and somebody notices that. Surface and crown fires are more what we expect to see with wildland fires. They have more visible flame lengths coming across the surface and across the landscape. A surface fire is going to be burning through grasses, brush, kind of the low-lying fuels, what carries most of the fuel load. And then a crown fire is going to be something that burns in the tree canopy itself. Usually it's a very intense, very extreme fire behavior. If we go back one slide there, I'm sorry. One of the things that kind of drives how each of those fires interact with each other is what we call the fire triangle here. And the fuels, the weather, the topography all play a role into determining how that fire is going to be burning through the landscape. If we've got a high fuel loading, especially in combination with some favorable topography for the fire to grow, and it's been hot and dry and we've got a little bit of wind, that's where we see those more intense extreme fires where it's getting up into the tree canopies and making those big fire growths like we saw last fall up to the north of us. So again, surface fires and crown fires, these are kind of what we see the most of when it becomes a big fire. And the surface fires, if it's either in less receptive fuels or the weather is not helping to push that fire, it tends to stay on the ground until it gets to either a trees or something like that where it's got some ladder fuels, and then it might try and climb up into that canopy and become a crown fire. Or if we've had, like we're starting to see some of that extreme fuel conditions where everything's dry and things are starting to be more prone to that fire growth, then we're starting to see that more extreme fire behavior, which is becoming more dangerous to the environment, the urban interface in the environment where we live, as well as the firefighters on the ground. So we have our preparedness for how we're going to fight these fires, but there's a lot people can do at home to help us out. So one of the big things that we run into a lot up here in the mountains is we have limited access, and that can be narrow roads into the forest, that sort of thing, but a lot of times it's also driveways. We have plowed snow on there because, as we're seeing, fire season is no longer a specific season. It's becoming fairly year-round. So if it's snowy out, it doesn't preclude the possibility of us having fire. So if driveways are plowed, it greatly increases our ability to get there and in a timely manner and help. If you can have trees, a lot of trees along the driveway, making sure that they're limbed and kind of along that same principle you do around your house, so that it limits that fire growth right along the driveway, again, helps us have a safe access in. And then our engines are fairly large sized, especially with having to carry a lot of water. So 12-foot wide by about 14-foot high clearance is going to give us the easiest access to be able to get in and out of driveways and areas. One of the other big challenges in the mountains is finding people's addresses. We have a number of different maps and map books and mapping programs to help us locate addresses. But one of the easiest things that can be done to help us out is have one of these either green address markers or a well-marked mailbox, if you have those there, to help us find that address. Oh, and one question from the chat there real quick. What are limbed trees? So limbed trees are taking those low-lying branches and trimming those off up to about 10 feet if you can get that high, to take away the the fuels that hang down to the low ground where the fire likes to spread, to help prevent it from climbing up into that tree surface, or tree canopy, sorry. Another thing that helps, especially in the potential that we do get a large fire, we're creatures of habit. We tend to always take the same way in and out of our house, inside our residence, but also to and from work, to and from the grocery store, that sort of thing. We have our routine, our normal. When we have a large fire, some of these escape routes could be where the fire is and not our normal way to get there. So one thing to help yourself out, find those alternative ways to and from your house, so that if you're in that situation where you can't go out the normal way, you are familiar with that backup plan. And especially up here where our cell phone service is spotty at best, having that ability to know that route and not have to rely upon technology to help out. We've seen this a couple of times in the past few years with various fires around the country. Either there's a challenge with the notification system to evacuate, or people not realizing the importance of when it's time to evacuate, it's time to go. One of the biggest things is, and Nate with with the emergency manager and Kevin with the sheriff's office, please chime in if I miss something here, but we're very big proponents of, if we ask people to leave, we try and do that early because of that limited access in and out of places. We're going to be much quicker than some places to do that. And I apologize, we just got a call. So I'm going to have to, I think, turn this back over to Jennifer.
Okay, I thought that might happen. Let's see. Well, thank you, David. Good luck. All right, sorry, everyone. Let's see. Get to the next slide. So basically, prepare for an evacuation. And if you're asked to evacuate, it's best to evacuate as quickly as you can. And there are lists of things that you can have ready to go during the fire season. A quick bag of clothes, medicine, that kind of thing's ready to go at your door, so you could just quickly leave if you have to. And while you're evacuating, if you turn on your AC, make sure your windows are rolled up and your doors are unlocked in case you do have to literally drive through a fire like in this picture. And then I think the next few slides are about defensible space. So maybe Nate, I'll just let you take over from here and we can just advance to your slides if you want, or if you want to use these, we can.
Sure, yeah. Honestly, why don't we just breeze through some of these? I think there's a little bit more specifics than mine. So if we just want to go back a couple.
Where do you want me to go? Here?
Oh, sorry, that first slide, perfect, yeah. So some of the things that you can really focus on that I know I'm sure some people have kind of heard the forecast now and is also kind of looking at the fact that we're probably going to have more weather like that in the future. There's some things that you can actually do as a landowner and a property owner that can really help decrease the risk of fire on your property, but also make it easier for first responders to go and kind of give your house a better chance. And so kind of there's kind of two ways you can really do this, and they're kind of both intertwined in my opinion, and it's best if you can kind of combine both of these. But one of those is defensible space. So this is kind of broken down generally into 3 zones. And as you can see in this picture here, you can see that first immediate zone around the house. That's pretty much 30 feet from your house, and that'll include your decks, structures that are connected to your house, somewhere like that. And what we really want to do here is kind of remove all of the dead plants and vegetation that can lead up to those fuels. And one thing that's really important here is getting any dead leaves or pine needles off of your deck, your roof, out of your gutters. I know it's hard to keep up with, but it really is something that could help a lot, because if you did get an ember that fell on a small pile of needles like that on your deck, it would then kind of just follow the line of fuel to your house. Another thing is kind of removing the branches that hang over your roof and keep dead branches at least 10 feet away from your chimney. You know, you kind of got to think that that chimney is something that you want to have as much fuel cleared off of. But then kind of just making sure you do that to all of the trees kind of regularly in that zone, to kind of keep a minimum of 10 feet from all of them. So it is not we don't want that continuous kind of like wick, if that makes sense. You know, we want to break up, get some room there to kind of disperse the fuels. Another really important thing, and I know it's hard, is relocating your wood piles to zone 2. I know it's nice to kind of have it near your house, under your deck, or under kind of an awning to kind of shelter it from the elements. But it really is best practice to have that in zone 2 and at least 30 feet away from your house out of that immediate zone 1. But yeah, Jennifer, if you want to hit the next slide. So this is zone 2 now. So this is kind of, so we've taken care of that first zone, and now we're working into zone 2. And so this is going to be 100 feet out from your building, the certain structures that are attached to that, decks, things like that. You want to make sure you're kind of taking care of these fuels as much as you can annually. So maybe that is an annual grass mowing event where you kind of make sure you take everything down to about 4 inches or below. Kind of create more of that horizontal space. So this is kind of what we were, Dave was alluding to with ladder fuel. So if you look at that diagram, you can see we have kind of shrubs leading to smaller trees, leading to a bigger tree. And then once that tree is kind of in the canopy of that tree, it's going to be a lot easier for that fire to spread. And so the rule of thumb for that is 3 times the height of the shrub equals the minimum vertical clearance. So you can kind of see the graph there that gives you a little bit of that layout. So that shrub is an X amount tall. Then you want to go at least 3 times more than that, the max height of that shrub, to make sure you're taking all of those ladder fuels out, because then those are going to kind of give that fuel wick, like we were talking about again, that gets into the crown of the fire, and it's a lot crown of the tree, and it's a lot easier for it to move when it's up there. Again, kind of, yeah, removing fallen leaves, needles, twigs, bark, cone, small branches, and that's kind of mostly what you'll be doing in zone 2. Jennifer, do you want to advance to zone 3? Oh, yeah, Jennifer, do you mind going back really fast? Someone wanted to get a capture of that diagram. Okay, I think if you didn't get it, we'll share the PowerPoint after this, and we can then share some of those with you after the fact. You can just put your email in the chat. So this is another defensible space diagram that then shows how slope plays into this. So kind of like you would assume, you know, it's a lot easier. You have a shorter distance over flatland than you do slope. So this does a great job of showing what's 2.5 times the width for shrubs. Add a slope to that, you want even more of a gap because of basically the slope and then the elevation there. And that not only should be done with shrubs, but also trees. So if you look on the bottom right there, for example, so if you had a mild to moderate slope, and a lot of the people in Coal Creek Canyon, kind of in this area of the Front Range do, that would mean that you would want at least 30 feet between those trees, whereas if it was completely flat land, slope less than 20%, it would be 10. So basically, the more sloped, you're going to really want to stress that kind of gap between the fuels to make sure that you have the adequate distance between those 2 trees or shrubs, whatever the fuel you're working with. So another important thing is smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. I must say I wasn't quite prepared for these slides, but I think most of these diagrams kind of explain itself. You know, it's something like if you wear a seatbelt when you're driving, it would be smart to have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in your house. It's just another thing that you can kind of add to the various things that you can do for your house that can help you best mitigate risk for you and your family. So kind of, and here are some of the things that give you brief breakdowns on what that means. So 2.5 minutes is the average time to escape a house fire after that fire alarm sounds. So basically you're hearing the alarm, then you have lighted paths, and then just know your exit strategies, know how to get out, have everyone on the same page with your family in that regard. And then remember, it's really important to change the batteries. I know my parents actually just had to change all of the batteries of all of their smoke detectors in their house. But it's a really worthwhile thing. So 2 of 3, you know, fire department deaths from fire in homes come with no smoke alarms. So make sure you're installing them in every part of your house, and then change your alarm batteries when you change your clocks, you know, kind of make it a daily routine or a yearly routine. Okay, yeah, and we can throw the Timberline stuff a little bit. We can throw that also to provide that information at the end. But So we kind of hit on this a little bit, but this is a little bit of my spiel now. But one way I like to think of this, so we talked about the defensible space aspect. Another very important aspect is home hardening. And a lot of people also talk about mitigating in the home ignition zone. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about with home hardening. I like to think of it from the front door to the forest. So this is kind of where you want to start, start from like your very front door, walking out to those zones of defensible space on your property. And a lot of that starts with home hardening. And this is basically making your structure and your property more resilient and resistant to ignition from radiative, connective heat, and embers. So this kind of creates a home that is going to be less vulnerable to ignite without suppression. So it's going to give your house kind of a longer time to, it's going to let your house be best risk mitigated of a fire. And so basically, we'll be going into that a little bit more, but then that coupled with defensible space, which as we kind of talked about is creating that area around your structure where the combustibles have been either removed, reduced, or altered kind of within that 100 feet, but then also you can increase that to 100 to 200 feet if the structure is in pretty steep terrain, as we saw from the diagrams. Awesome. So here's kind of, I think, a good concept to just look, and we're going to go a little bit more into what are some of the things that you can do kind of today after this weekend for home hardening. But I think this is a really good diagram to just look, because if you can tell, like, there's multiple things that kind of need to be done for your house. Even in that first zone 1A, this is kind of something where if you did landscaping, having rocks, pavers, certain things like that, this is an area they like to call the non-combustible zone, or ignition. You want to have as many ignition resistant things within this immediate vicinity. But it really takes kind of a lot of things, an important thing is your windows, having eaves on your roof, the type of roof you have, and kind of what everything else is around your deck. You would like to have a break, for example, if you see that fence, you want to have a break between that fence and your house. If it was directly connected to your house, fire can then kind of burn onto that fence and basically follow it all the way up to your doorstep. So it's things like that. You kind of have to get outside. And we have a bunch of materials that we'll be putting in the chat after this that are Google Drives with documents about this. But really kind of just get out, take a walk around your house, and really just start thinking, writing down, because there's tons of times that I'm sure it's something you won't find the first go around, but after the second, you'll start to see a little bit more about it. Jennifer, do you want to next slide? All right, so here's some examples of kind of things that you could do either this weekend or this month that are very low cost and with pretty good things and good habits to have for home hardening. So one, and this is a really important one, is routinely removing debris from your roofs and gutters. I don't know about you, but my dad always made me help doing that when I was younger. So when I see a gutter like this on the left, it makes me very anxious, but this is something that you could definitely do. I know it's a pain, but make a weekend of it, get up there, kind of clean those out, get a ladder, because that could be a very important thing, kind of getting that fuel out of there. Because if an ember fell right into that pile of pine needles like we see right here, you're going to really have some problems. Installing window screens. This is another one too that we talked about, removing vegetation and debris from around your deck. You really want to minimize as many fuels around wooden structures by your house. And kind of along that lines, don't store anything combustible like firewood, lumber, other things like that under the deck or near the structure. You're kind of just adding more fuel to that and kind of creating a little bit more risk. Enclosing vents, soffits, chimneys, and chimney stovepipe openings with 8-inch metal mesh screening is very important. And we actually have some documents that can go into a little bit more that we'll be sharing at the end. Weather stripping around your garage doors. This is an important thing because you really want to make sure that you don't get embers going underneath there. Because if you think about it, you have very combustible things generally in a garage. You're going to have that jerry tank of gasoline for the lawnmower, and then you're going to have that saw fuel for your chainsaw. So that's one of those small things that you can do. installing metal spacers between wood fences, gates, and the structures abut. So that's one of the things that we saw in that diagram. They had a gap. I've seen some folks have metal or other less flammable things kind of joining that fence, but really kind of making sure that you don't have that continual wood then leading to your house. So here's some things that are going to be higher cost, but pretty important. So a really important one is installing a Class A fire rated roof. If you can see here, that's actually them doing a test. Jack Cohen, he actually does a fair amount of testing in, I'm not quite sure where the national lab where they do this is, but that's basically a fire test that they did on a Class A roof tile, and it gives your roofing a lot better chance of kind of withstanding embers and other fires kind of starting on top of your roof. Replacing decking and siding with ignition resistant materials and avoiding untreated wood and vinyl siding. So this is kind of around that same vein where if you have a wooden deck, that kind of increases, that's a big area of fuel basically leading up to your house. So it's best if you could to have a little bit more ignition resistant materials when you're creating things like that on your property. Replacing single pane windows with dual and multi-pane windows, and preferably tempered glass. This is going to give you a lot more heat resistant, and also make sure when you have that, you have metal screens and things like that. Replace combustible fences with non-combustible fences. That's another thing, I guess. I feel like I've talked a lot about fences, and probably not everyone has them in the mountains, but and another thing is boxed in eave construction. So that's one thing. Shoot, I don't think I included a picture of an eave, but it's a common kind of overhanging that you get in some model houses, but it's important to kind of box in all of the things that could lead an ember or any type of heat kind of into your house. Awesome. So kind of as we talked, and I don't know if I think we can kind of skip this. Here's another diagram that kind of shows, but this is kind of what we mean by using that kind of the zone 1, 2, and 3 approach, and really kind of being as diligent as you can. And actually we'll be talking, but there are some resources that are available to folks in Coal Creek Canyon, but also, excuse me, in Gilpin County. So one of these is actually, so I partially wear 2 hats. I work with Slaws and Slaws, and I also work with one of the other resources we'll be talking about. But Slaws and Slaws is a community-powered cost share that has been operating in Coal Creek Canyon for a little over 10 years now. And basically what they do is they focus on fuel mitigation in those first 2 zones of defensible space. So one thing that a lot of people say is, it's really hard. You have a bunch of trees, a bunch of lodgepole around your house. It's a lot of work for you to take on for several weekends of a month or your summer. And one thing that really makes that a lot easier is having a lot more hands. And that's kind of where Slaws and Slaws comes in with their volunteer power through the community. And kind of as you see, we're building a stronger community through this healthier forest, but also kind of making a safer community for our residents by kind of helping them mitigate and kind of open the doors for more mitigation of wildfire on their lands. One thing that's really cool about this program is it's basically community-based mitigation, but it's followed by lunch. So if you start out early, you're going to be dragging brush. I'm not going to lie, it's a hard day, but at the end of that, you kind of have a lunch, and not kind of, you have a nice big communal lunch. It's a nice way to get to know people, but also kind of look at the work you did today and talk to other people, see where they're at with mitigation and if they have other questions. And without trying to have too much of a shameless plug, I really want to encourage everyone to either reach out, volunteer, or reach out to us if you want to host a project. If you, after this, are looking around your property and saying, yeah, there are a couple trees that I've definitely had on my list for a while now, and I'm sure there's a couple more things I could do. Yeah, reach out to us. Our contact info is there, but we're slawsandslaws@gmail.com. Or you can also just Google Slaws and Slaws, and slawsandslaws.org is one of the first things that pops up. We have a lot of our information on the website there, so feel free to go there and reach out to us. But I really highly encourage you, and even volunteering is a great way to learn more. You know, we work with a lot of very knowledgeable foresters that usually come to our projects to help KIP, but also a lot of the board members, people who have been included in Slaws and Slaws, have a wealth of experience and knowledge about this, and it's a great way too to meet people in the community. Also, and I'm sure in this, sorry, but for Gilpin County, Slaws and Slaws actually, there's a similar group called Axe and Snacks, and they have actually been working in Gilpin County. So I would highly encourage you to also reach out to them if you need work or kind of looking around your property and see some things. But they're also kind of just starting up under that similar community-powered mitigation group at Slaws and Slaws. So another thing, so this is my other hat. I have two hats. My other hat is the Boulder Watershed Collective. So we kind of work on a little larger level, but we're also concerned with folks, you know, being as mitigated as possible. But we really work to promote and invest in watershed health through increased forest health and restoration. So this is where we're going to kind of, we're looking at kind of the large lens. You know, watershed health is not only about preserving our water and our waterways, but forest health really plays into that. And as we've kind of seen, especially on the Front Range, and I'm sure it's nothing new to everyone here, but fires can have some pretty adverse effects with water and flooding and a wealth of other things. So we like to kind of focus on a little more rounded forest health approach. So we are really kind of here to help landowners leverage and navigate opportunities for grants to increase forest health on their properties, but also kind of restore some of the forest in their property and help them manage it a little bit better. And I actually, yeah, and I have a small blurb. I forgot I can't exit out when I'm when I'm host, so or recording, sorry. But next slide, please. Awesome. So here's some other important resources, and I'll actually be dropping a bunch in the chat after I finish recording. Zoom will then let me exit out. But if you're in Boulder County, I highly encourage you to Google Wildfire Partners if you're not already aware of them. They've been doing some really great work for Boulder County and are a wealth of resources if you're in Boulder County. Another really good one is Colorado State Forest Service. As you saw, you know, that's who Jennifer is affiliated with, or Colorado State University, but Colorado State Forest Service is also a wealth of information. They have a lot of very good things that they have for kind of documents to figure that out. Like we said, Axe and Snacks in Gilpin County, and I think, yeah, it looks like we have their Gmail in the chat is there, as well as there. And I encourage you to look at coalitions and collaboratives. They actually have a bunch of toolkits, basically compiled documents that you could be using for kind of informing yourself a little bit more about defensible space, but also home ignition zone. You know, what type of roof did I get? What type of vents and things like that? You know, it can be a lot. So they have some really good resources on their website as well that I would highly encourage recommending. And I'll also be dropping some Google folders into the chat, so feel free to use those. There's a lot of compiled documents from other agencies. A lot of them are named right here, but feel free to read through that. I'll admit some of the papers might be a little dense, but there's also some smaller things and a little bit more easy reading than some of the thicker stuff. But I think, Deborah, I think that was my last slide.
Yeah, that's our last slide. I'm gonna stop sharing and we can start addressing some of the questions here. And then I also have a final little poll question for everyone while we're talking through some of these questions. As soon as you answer it, it'll disappear on your screen. So I think Maya,